For the third weekend in a row, demonstrations against the government's corona policy took place in France. Could those protesters pose a threat to President Macron? Some of the protests bring back bad memories. Again, there have been mass protests in France against tightening the corona rules. According to the Interior Ministry, around 204,000 people took to the streets on Saturday to demonstrate against compulsory vaccination for health workers and an expansion of the corona proof requirement. There were therefore more than 180 protests across the country. There were occasional riots. TV pictures showed how the police used water cannons in Paris. According to the Interior Ministry, 19 people were arrested. 3 police officers were injured during the protests in Paris. It is the third weekend in a row that there are major corona protests across the country. Last Saturday, more than 160,000 people took part in them. France is currently fighting a fourth corona wave. Head of State Emmanuel Macron announced a new stricter hygiene regulation in mid-July in view of the increasing number of infections. Parliament approved the controversial innovations earlier this week after heated debates. The last hurdle will have to be overcome by the new law on Thursday, when the Constitutional Council, convened by Prime Minister Jean Castex, takes a position on the subject of severe criticism. The obligation to vaccinate in the healthcare system and the expansion of the obligation to provide evidence of a negative corona test, recovery or vaccination not only affect vaccination opponents and corona deniers. So, people from different currents mixed at the demonstrations. This heterogeneity and the size of the nationwide protests are also fueling fears in France of a new Yellow Vest movement or a resurgence of their protests. The Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vests, started their demonstrations in 2018 as a regional movement against the increase in petrol prices. Their subjects quickly expanded into a criticism of the reform policies of the central government and President Macron. The protests had repeatedly led to devastation and violence, including on the Parisian Boulevard Champs-Élysées. A demonstration of the anti-corona protests on the street was accompanied by a significant police presence on Saturday. The leader of the right-wing extremist party Rassemblement National, the former Front National, Marine Le Pen, called on the government on Twitter to take the protests seriously. There is still time to back down, she says. The leading left-wing politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon also writes that the protests had to be respected and understood. Although 204,000 protesters in the middle of the holiday season in France are a respectable number and the demonstrations are growing in size from week to week, it remains to be seen whether the protests will continue. The law with the new regulation is to come into force on August 9th, so proof of visits to bars, cafes, restaurants and journeys by long-distance train will be valid in just over a week. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin also said that the numbers had to be put into perspective. If I draw a parallel with the 4 million people who were vaccinated as a result of the president's speech, one finds that the demonstrators are not the majority, the newspaper Le Parisien quoted him as saying. And by the way, don't mind my French. In fact, both vaccination registrations and the number of doses injected daily had skyrocketed after Macron's announcement. Around 62% of people in France are now vaccinated against the coronavirus at least once. More than half of the population is fully vaccinated. Nevertheless, the health situation remains tense. Most recently, the number of new infections per 100,000 people nationwide was around 214 within a week. In some areas, for example on the border with Spain or in northern Corsica, even stricter rules now apply. In some cases, shops and restaurants have to close earlier, and people also have to wear masks outdoors. And Eric, you know why I said the sentence in the middle of the video. And for the rest of you, I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.